Hi guys, GrandJ here and welcome to another one of our videos. I'm sorry about the delay guys, but here we are today and we're going to be talking about the last major element for Opus 6 water review. So here we go, let's do it. So first of all, we have a Marik. It's a 5 cost sword at 9,000 power. A Marik doesn't receive damage less than his power, and when a Marik attacks, all forwards other than a Marik you control gain plus 2,000 power until the end of the turn. So a couple of things to break down about this card. First, it's a 5 CP 9k, so it's on curve. Its first ability doesn't receive damage less than its power, so this is effectively, this card inherently has the Mingu protection on him, so it does make him highly resistant against ping effects and any sort of damage type ability, so that's pretty good by itself. And Mingu is a pretty strong water backup, so yeah. If you are playing Mingu, then you really sort of lose a majority of the reason to play a Marik. But there is a reason this set for why water decks may no longer play Mingu as a backup. So taking that in consideration, his first ability is actually relevant, but depending upon the build that you're trying to play. Secondly, when a Marik attacks, it gives all your other forwards plus 2,000 power until the end of the turn. So this is a power very similar to 4-cost Titus that we have from Opus 1. So it is Titus, when he attacks, gives all your water forwards plus 1,000 power till the end of the turn. So in that regard, Titus does become a 9,000 power forward when he's attacking, which is the same stats that a Marik would have. But a Marik gives all your forwards plus 2,000 power, whereas Titus gives only all your other water forwards plus 1,000 power. That being said, though, water does seem to be right now in a pretty good position in regards to its ability to fight in combat. There's a lot of summons and abilities in water that both increase or decrease your opponent's power. So water generally has a pretty good time fighting right now, which is interesting because like during set 1, water didn't really have much in terms of combat, and it was generally considered one of the weaker elements. But right now, water has a lot of support in terms of fighting, so I don't really think that you really need to go to the extent of playing a Marik if you want to sort of just increase the power of your forwards by a little bit when you're attacking. Plus 2,000 power is a very relevant boost, definitely like a much bigger jump than plus 1,000 power. That being said though, I don't really feel that in a lot of cases you really want to spend the 5 CP on a Marik to give your guys plus 2,000 power if he attacks. So yeah, so I don't think that this card really sort of is worth it. I think if you were to play a card in a similar sort of slot, I think you'd much rather go with Legendary Cecil from Opus 2. It's same stat line, but that Legendary Cecil prevents all your forwards from receiving damage from abilities or summons, and also yeah, gives all you guys plus 1,000 power, although it does have the caveat that Cecil must block if he's able to. So if you can work around that restriction, I do think Legendary Cecil is a better bet or better play than a Marik in water decks. Next is Ultimecia. She is a 3-cost forward at 7,000 power. She's a witch. Her first ability is dull 3 active forwards, choose 1 forward, dull it. And second ability is S Water, choose 2 forwards, dull the first, and activate the other. So yeah, so a couple of things to break down. So yes, she is on curve, but she doesn't have like a passive ability or any sort of ability that happens straight away. So her first ability of dull 3 forwards to choose 1 forward to dull it, that is a very expensive cost. Although there are definitely ways to get around that. In that like water has some ways of reactivating their forwards, but having to dull 3 of your forwards, and like do note you can only dull your forwards to pay the cost. To choose 1 forward to dull it, that's spending a lot of forwards in order to just dull forward. So I don't think that this card, like the first effect, is particularly like cost efficient. It feels like if you have 3 forwards on the field, even if you include Ultimecia, it definitely seems like you would much rather use your forwards to proactively do something as opposed to spend dulling 3 forwards to reactively dull one of your opponent's forwards. It pretty much is only relevant against attacks or trying to attack through. Simply because if you're doing it to try to lock down a dull type ability or an activatable type ability, then your opponent can always do it in response. So like it doesn't really help out in that regard. So effectively, all you're doing it for is to stop an attack or to dull one of your opponent's forward so it's unable to block. But if you have 3 active forwards on the field already, generally you can just attack through with all your guys and you're generally going to get over their forward anyways. So that first ability I think is not particularly cost efficient, and I don't think there will be too many situations where you would want to use it or you would want to try to build a deck where you'd be using it more actively. The second ability of Knight's Arrow to S Water to like dull a forward and reactivate a forward. Like, while it is well costed, it does require you to play like more Ultimecias, and inherently this Ultimecia doesn't have like a fantastic ability by herself, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of support or really sort of anything to force you to build to play Ultimecia in your deck. So there's no real archetype that she's really sort of building into. So yeah, you won't be activating her S ability too often. When you do activate her S ability, it's not fantastic. So do note that you have to choose 2 forward. So you can't just say choose if there's only 1 forward on field, just choose on forward, dull it, and then or just like choose on forward, activate it. So yeah, there's always got to be 2 forwards. If your opponent doesn't have a forward, then unfortunately you're going to have to dull a forward in order for you to activate a forward. That being said, though, I think so you can't just choose the same forward twice. So yeah, so it is a little bit restrictive. Yeah, I feel that they could have gone like choose up to 2 forwards, dull one of them, and activate the other, and I think you would have been fine. But yeah, it's a little bit cumbersome to use this ability. Ultimecia is like not a great card, like by her stats alone. There's not a lot of copies of her. Although there is that Opus 1 Ultimecia, which yeah, it's definitely not really stood the test of time. Yeah, I think that this card doesn't really sort of hold up in the modern metagame. Next we have Forward in 7. It's a 5-cost forward, adds EX Burst. It's a backup. Its EX Burst is when a Forward in 7 enters a field, you may search for 1 card and add it to your hand. When Forward in 7 is put from the field into break zone, draw 1 card. So if you consider that most like searching backups are usually around the 3 or 4 cost mark, Forward does cost like 1 to 2 CP more than those other backups. But the caveat is that he obviously does get you to search for any 1 card. Do note, unlike other card games, where you get to search your deck for a card with no restrictions, in Final Fantasy, when you're searching for a card, even if there's no restrictions on it, you still have to reveal it to your opponent. So yeah, so you have to reveal what you search for, even though there are no card restrictions on what you can search for technically from your deck. However, this card does become significantly more like playable if you consider the fact that yeah, when you put him from the field to break zone, draw 1 card. So it takes his base cost from 5 CP back to a 3 CP backup. That also inherently allows you to search for any card from your deck. So when you take into that that entire package, it's actually not bad. And considering the fact that he's EX burst as well, does mean that occasionally you'll receive him as damage, and then you just get to search for any card from your deck. So it's a really powerful EX burst ability. But the thing is that in order to play him effectively, you're going to want to play him in a deck that has ways to eat up your backups, whether it be new legendary Siren. Personally, I think that Heroic Lulu from set 1 probably might be the best best combination with this card, where you do sacrifice your backups to deal damage, which is something obviously that Water kind of lacks the ability to deal damage to forwards. And yeah, you can sacrifice backups from Lulu's ability. This isn't even like the only water backup that has that can take advantage of Lulu. We had from the recent Opus 5-star decks. We had what's his name, the Prince. We had that 6-cost backup that when it comes into play, it allows you to draw some cards. Then when he leaves play, he draws you another card as well. Laza, that's it. So yeah, so Laza does also combo well into this package as well. So potentially, yeah, it's possible to build a Water Lightning 2-color deck where you're sacrificing your backups and you're getting really good value for them as well. So yeah, so like this card isn't unplayable, but definitely it's one of those cards that will have to fit into a very specific archetype, and that archetype would have to take advantage of being able to destroy your backups. But when you do, this card's actually like pretty good value and pretty strong when you do. Next, we got Aiko. She's a 3-cost backup. If you cast a summon this turn, the cost required to play Aiko on the field is reduced by 2, which effectively makes her a 1 CP backup. Her S ability is S Dull, search for 1 summon and add it to your hand. So this card, like, besides from the fact that its name is Aiko, it's actually surprisingly solid, I feel, in my opinion. So water is one of those elements that does like to play more summons. It does have some decent support for summons, and considering how we have Mingu this set, it definitely like feels like it can push more in that direction again. So yeah, so like Aiko's base cost as a 1 CP backup is actually pretty solid, but you can also just like use additional copies of Aiko that you draw in the mid to late game to just search for summons, which sort of further builds into that summon support sort of deck. And the fact that she's FF9 does allow you to search for her in the form of Steiner. So Steiner, this card that saw a lot of play in Opus 3. When he enters play, you can search your deck for any FF9 character. So yeah, so that does include backups, which does include Ico, which means that towards the mid to late game, if you do happen to play Shanna and you don't really want to search for a Zidane or a Garnet, if you already have them on the field, or even Beatrix, you always have the option to grab out an Ico and then have the ability to use her special ability to search for a specific summon. So it brings a lot of flexibility to the decks. Obviously, you are sacrificing the free cost Ico where you get to search your deck for FF9 character forward, but yeah, I don't think it's a too major sacrifice, especially if you're playing like Friedsteiners, which is like a very excellent card already by itself. I think Ico does sacrificing the Searcher Ico is not too bad if the payoff is having potentially multiple of these Icos that you can search your deck for summons with. So yeah, so I don't think that she's a card that's immediate in FF9 decks, but I think she's a very viable alternative if you choose not to play the Searcher free cost Ico. Next, we have Vocar. It's a 1 CP backup, just like all the other 1 CP backups. The Water Vocar, I think, is one that would see less play compared to the other water summons. Simply because Evoker, being a 1 CP backup, it's not super efficient to play on turn 1 when you're discarding a card for it, because you're effectively paying the same amount of CP as you would for a 2 CP backup, but it doesn't have some sort of passive or activatable effect later on. The real strength of Evokers is that is in your turn 2 or turn 3, you can just dull back up in order to put them into play. That being said, though, Evoker does clash with any odd costed backups in terms of when you can put them in. So if you have one backup free, you could tap it, or you can dull it to put Evoker into play, or you can dull it, discard a card, put in a Vocar or a Mingu per se, or even an Ico if that's what you want to do as well. So in that regard, Evoker clashes really heavily with Water's existing backup line. Because Water has a lot of strong like free CP backups, and I think that's a major reason why you don't see more Evoker in like mono Water decks, simply because there are already like a lot of really good free CP Water backups that clash at that spot, and those times where you could play Evoker, you're effectively pushing out those times where you could be playing your other free CP backups as well. So because of that, I think like Water Evoker is one of the least relevant Evokers in the game. Next, we have Sahajin. It's a free CP monster. Pays 0 until the end of turn. Sahajin becomes a 4 to 6,000 power. When Sahajin attacks, draw 1 card, then discard 1 card from your hand. You can only use this ability once per turn. So yeah, so this is the water monster from this set. That's part of the pay 0 variants. Yeah, so I don't think this card is particularly relevant. Yes, it does like help you cycle through your deck, but Water already has a lot of ways to cycle through its deck right now. Yeah, whether it's to draw or discard cards, Water has a lot of other options and tools available. Yeah, and inherently paying free CP for a monster that can transform into a 6,000 power monster, I feel that you're kind of like overpaying for it. If this was a 2 CP monster, then I could definitely see a place for it. But I think at 3 CP, it's just costing you a little too much, and the body that you're getting as a reward is a little bit too small. And I think that the ability of drawing card and discarding card is a little bit underpowered. And I guess it's kind of like pretty much the same with all the like pretty much all the like monsters that get to transform for free from this set. A lot of them seem very underwhelming. A lot of their like when they attack type abilities are all pretty weak, and their bodies are generally below curve as well. And I think Sahajin like is the same. It's just underwhelming as a card, and I think that there are better options. So next card we're talking about is Shun. It's a 5 cost forward at 7,000 power, and it's got an actually really interesting ability. When Shun enters the field, choose on forward with a power inferior to Shun's. You gain control of this forward until the end of the turn. So yeah, this is a really interesting concept, even though I don't think that this card is particularly strong. I think it's actually kind of underpowered, all things considered. So 5 CP, 7k forward, so it is effectively 2 CP below the curve. Effectively, you're looking at, you would kind of want to expect a 7k body on a free CP forward. But how's its power justified? So yeah, so when it does come into play, you get to choose one of your opponent's forwards with a power less than Shun's, and you take control of it until the end of the turn. So a couple of caveats to this. So the first one is that if you control, like when you gain control of your opponent's forward, unless it has haste, you can't like use its dull abilities or attack of it on the same turn, even though your opponent would have been able to. So even though your opponent played it like say 2 turns ago, and you take control of it now, because you haven't had control of it since the start of your turn, you can't use its dull abilities and you can't attack with it. So that's actually a pretty major restriction. You can't, The fact that it doesn't inherently give the forward that you take for the turn haste, whereas a lot of other card games where you do get to take a creature or forward for a turn, usually it gives them haste so you can do something with it, right? So in effect, shooting just kind of like if you have nothing to combo with it, shooting just takes a guy and basically just makes it so your opponent can't interact with him until the end of the turn. So it's not a particularly amazing ability from just that. The second sort of the second caveat to this card is that obviously you want to make Shuyan's base power as high as you can in order for you to increase the number of targets that you can steal with Shuyan. And here's the interesting thing about it. So the way it's worded, so it says when Shuyan enters the field, choose one forward with a power inferior to Shuyan's, right? So you, at the time of him entering play, his ability goes on the stack, and at that point, you have to choose a forward with a power less than him, right? So even if you use an ability to increase his power, such as the new Siren card or any sort of like activating abilities that buff him, you can't choose a forward that ends up having a lower power than Shuyan's even after the buffs, right? Because Shuyan has to choose a forward when it comes into play. So you can't buff him up in response to try to take something bigger. So that means the only way for Shuyan to hit a bigger target is if you have any sort of passive or ongoing abilities that increases his power before his ability activates. So cards like Legendary Sets from Opus 2 or Vocar, these are things that are passive increases. So they do allow your Shuyan to have slightly larger range in what he can steal. So yeah, so unfortunately you can't just like play Shuyan in responsibility, use like Kefka to buff him up by plus 5,000. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. If it was worded differently, it says if it said something like choose one forward, and then on resolution, if its power is less than Shuyan's, take it, then it would work in that way. But the fact that you have to choose a forward straight up with a power inferior to Shuyan's means that you can't buff it in response to try to hit something larger. So taking all these things into consideration, if you're playing a mono water deck, you're probably going to be playing Vocar anyway. So let's take into consideration that, like, yeah, he's always going to be 8,000 power, right? So in that situation, you'll get to steal your opponent's free cost forward. That's 7,000 power, and you get to take it until the end of the turn, right? Unless you have something that you can like proactively do with it, with the forward that you steal, you're gonna give it back to your opponent anyways, right? So you didn't get much value out of it. So obviously there are ways around it. There are cards that sacrifice your own forwards in order to do stuff. So yeah, so Amaranth would be an example from Opus 3. It was a forward that you can sacrifice your own forwards to deal damage to other forwards. That being said, though, you do have to play a secondary color, and I think in Water there doesn't really have to be much. The only card I think potentially that might be relevant with this is if you played it with Legendary Kefka, the one that sacrifices your forwards as a cost to put him into play. In that sort of scenario, I definitely could see this Shuyan being more relevant or playable in that case. But yeah, as it is right now, unless you find a very specific interaction with him, I feel that he's quite underpowered. And even in those few niche situations, I feel that you really have to go out of your way in order to make Shuyan relevant. And like Shuyan isn't even able to take a lot of big things. So yeah, so in a lot of cases, you're just really sort of taking something small. And yeah, I think his power is a little bit underwhelming, simply because of the way his ability is worded. Next, we have Summoner. It's a 2 CP backup. Dull, put Summoner into break zone, cast a summon from your hand. The cost required to cast it is reduced by 2. It cannot become 0. So yeah, so this one's interesting for a couple of reasons. So if you do the maths on this, it's actually not a particularly fantastic backup. So yeah, so you obviously sacrifice this backup to have a 2 CP discount on a summon that you play. But if you compare this to Yuna from set 1, where you don't have to break her and she reduces the cost of all water summons from your hand by 1, Yuna, or like her passive ability reduces water summons by 1, and then when you dull her, effectively she's paying 1 CP and she's reduced 1 CP, so she's reducing the cost of your water summons by 2 anyways. Whereas Summoner, you're dulling him and putting him into a break zone to give a 2 CP discount. So you have to consider the fact that you're already dulling it. So in effect, this card only really discounts a summon by 1 CP because you're dulling this backup. So when you consider that his ability is to reduce the cost of a summon by 1, you're not getting a major discount for sacrificing this backup. Yeah, so yeah, because of that, the numbers just don't quite kind of match up. And even though it is a 2 CP backup that you can just kind of put into play, I think you'd much rather choose some other 2 CP backups instead, that might have more relevant or more powerful type abilities. I think that this card's ability is just a little bit underwhelming, and it is only relevant, I feel, if you're playing a duo color deck, because if you're playing a single water mono element water deck, then Yuna's just going to straight up be better in all those cases, because Yuna doesn't have to break and provides the same sort of discount. Obviously, if you combo Yuna with Summoner, then obviously you can get like a pretty major discount on your summons. But then again, you're spending a lot of CP on like a big summon, or like you're spending a lot of resources like breaking backups and stuff just to get a discount on a summon. And a lot of the bigger summons from water aren't particularly good. Pretty much only like big water summon that's kind of relevant would be Sildra, but even then, like, Sildra hasn't really seen play for quite a while. So yeah, so Summer seems to be one of those cards that potentially could have a niche spot in a sort of more duo color deck, because in mono water by itself, it doesn't really have a need for a backup like this. Next we have Templar. It's a 4 CP forward at 8,000 power, so it's on curve. It's a standard unit. Dull, choose one forward. During this turn, the next damage dealt to it is reduced by 2,000 instead. So yeah, so I think that's this card is solid. But I think for a 4 CP forward at 8k, you kind of want a little bit more of a proactive ability, or something that's a little bit more powerful, especially if you have to sacrifice its attack or use its stun ability. So yeah, in that regard, like, water already has ways to prevent damage. And in my opinion, Adamantoise probably fulfills a similar, if not better role than Templar would, because Adamantoise prevents 3,000 damage instead of 2, and Adamantoise also draws your card. Adamantoise, you can use this ability straight away. So Adamantoise is a lot more flexible. Obviously, it doesn't come with a body, but that being said, though, Adamantoise is very, like, well costed. And Templar, you could obviously just put in a different water forward at that same 4 CP or 3 CP slot, and you probably be better off. So Templar, while its stats are fine, its ability is underwhelming for what it does, and it doesn't fulfill a need or requirement that water already can't do particularly well already. Next we have Scott. It's a 3 CP forward at 4,000 power. For each backup you control, Scott gains plus 1,000 power. If you control a card named Hilda, Scott and card named Gordon you control gain Brave. So yeah, so this card is very similar to the Opus 3 card Knight that we had. So they both have the same abilities. For each backup you control, you gain it gains plus 1,000 power. Obviously, Scott costs like 1 CP more, and he has plus 1,000 power on him. So if you just have 5 backups, disregarding any sort of buffs on the backups, Knight would be an 8,000 power forward at 2, and Scott would be a 9,000 power forward at 3. And obviously, like, if you have like things like Maria or Vocar and stuff to buff them, then that number gets even higher. The big reason that the big thing that really pushed Knight to being much more playable is that Knight was a forward that you can bring back with Lena. So Lena was a 5 CP legendary forward that allowed you to bring a water forward that cost 2 or less from your breaks and back to the field, and allowed you to recur these Knights very effectively towards the end game when you already had 5 backups, and you're basically getting these free like 9k or 8k forwards onto the field and attacking with them. Scott doesn't have that advantage of being a free card that your Lena can search for, and there doesn't seem to be any existing water forwards that can have a similar type combo as Lena and Knight does. So that really hinders Scott a lot. Obviously, he is FF2, which means that, yeah, if you do happen to play him with either a deck that's using Wind and Leon or Fire and Guide, and there is a benefit there. And his secondary ability of, if you have Hilda, then yeah, obviously him and the card named Gordon gets Brave, which is a little bit, which does sort of help it out a little bit. So definitely, like, Scott seems weaker than Knight in terms of just purely like numbers and statistical and like efficiency values. It brings a whole lot of like other value though. So it's like the fact that he's FF2 and the fact that he can gain Brave and give like Gordon Brave, which is pretty irrelevant because Gordon's pretty weak, especially pretty weak and in the current metagame. So yeah, it's these additional little like quirks that can potentially push Scott into having a niche place in decks. But yeah, if anything, his ability alone doesn't make him good. The fact that he's FF2 and can potentially get brave is what might push him potentially into a like wind water or a fire water FF2 build. Next, we have Drago Bolton. It's a 2 CP monster that's got Water 1, put Drago Bolton into Break Zone, choose one forward opponent controls, return it to its owner's hand. So effectively, this is a part of, like, it's very similar to all the cycle of dragons that we got this set, where you're getting a monster that breaks itself to have a ability very similar to a summon that's very common in that element. So in this case, we got a monster that breaks itself for a Leviathan type ability. However, with all the other cards, the monsters, you're generally paying the same or a lower cost for the monsters than you were for the summon. But in this case, we're actually paying more. So we're paying the 2 CP, put Drago Bolton in play, and then we're paying Water 1 to effectively do the same thing as a free CP Leviathan. And yeah, and Leviathan's the EX burst as well, so you have to consider that. Even though, yeah, Water does have abilities such as Gao to return Drago Bolton from the break zone to the field. So, yeah, even considering these things, you're paying 1 CP extra for Leviathan. And when you consider that, usually if you're playing Leviathans, you're probably going to have Una backup, which does reduce your Leviathans from 3 CP to 2 CP. So when you take that all in consideration, you're paying 2 CP extra, because effectively Leviathan becomes a 2 CP summon, whereas you're paying 4 CP for Drago Bolton for effectively the same ability that also doesn't have EX burst on it. So in that regard, Drago Bolton is woefully inferior than Leviathan, like unbelievably worse. So because of that, like, yeah, there seems to be no reason to play Drago Bolton over Leviathan unless you really want to push into the monster synergy of Mira and Gao and so on. Potentially in those situations, then maybe, but other than that, I just really I think you're much better off just like playing Leviathan and Una. It's much more consistent and efficient, and you do get free EX bursts off of it. Next, we have Siren. It's a 1 CP summon, EX burst, and choose one water forward against plus 4,000 power until the end of the turn. Now, this is a really powerful ability. We haven't had a card that increases the power of your forwards, or like a summon that increases the power of your forwards by this much, and especially at this cost for a long time. So it's very similar to Opus 1, where Earth had Golem, which was a card that increase the power of one of your forwards by 2,000 power. If it's blocking, increased by 4,000 instead. So Siren is able to give that plus 4,000 power boost, which is a huge boost. It pretty much allows your forwards that are like 1 CP or 2 CP below your opponent's forwards to like win in combat, just like straight out win in combat. Your 7k, your free CP 7k will outfight your opponent's like what? 5 CP 9 or 10k. So Siren allows you to win combats very well, and it's the fact that it's 1 CP is actually like very well costed. So it's very cheap and efficient play, and the fact that its EX burst is just like really good as well. So there might be times where your opponents got some larger forwards, they deal damage to you, you EX bursts, buff one of your guys. All of a sudden your opponent has to like reconsider their attack plans because they haven't considered that your forward might get a plus 4,000 boost to it. So this card's actually like pretty good. Obviously very much so pushed into like a mono water deck, because obviously you can only choose water forwards. But all things considered, if you do play a mono water deck, I think that this is like a very easy free off, just because it's so powerful. And water generally is already able to protect itself pretty well. So giving you guys plus 4,000 boost on command, not even like while on attacking or defending, is actually really powerful. And I think yeah, this card's actually very solid. Very interested to try this out in like a more defensive, slower water build. Next, we got Astral Urgent. It's a 2 CP backup. It's a standard unit. It's got Dull. Reveal the top card of your deck. If it is a backup, add it to your hand. If it is not a backup, put it into the break zone. I actually like this card a lot. So if you look at it, stat-wise, it's good. It's 2 CP backup, so that means you can just chuck it down on turn 1, and it's not a big deal, right? And like it's ongoing ability to like potentially add cards from your deck to your hand for just dulling is actually really good. If you consider that like normally in a deck you'd have like usually about 16 or 17 backups usually, then like what? So that's basically a third of your deck. So about a third of your deck, or like hitting 1 out of 3 with this card is actually pretty good. Yeah. It's pretty good. And obviously if you have any ways to sort of like have ways to gain information about what's on top of your deck, whether it's like with the water backup Geomancer or with the ice backup Yule, Yeah, if you have like any way to know what the top card of your deck is, then this card becomes much stronger. But not only that, like it's just something you can do. It's something you can just do at the end of your opponent's turn without having to overcommit to anything. So like, let's say if you have you have CP open available to respond to your opponent's stuff, so you purposely keep 1 or 2 backups open in case you want to use a Leviathan or something, right? And let's say if your opponent doesn't do anything during their turn that would cause you to like need to use Leviathan or need to cast summon, you have 2 CP left over at the end of your opponent's turn, so you might as well use it, right? So yeah, so this is a very easy backup that you can just keep open, and if your opponent doesn't force you to do anything with it, you just dull it, check out the top card of your deck. If it's a backup, you basically just scored yourself a free card. Yeah, so like, even though like the odds of it aren't too terrible, 1 out of 3 is like not terrible considering that you're not really sort of investing any cost into it. It's kind of one of those backups where if you don't use it, you just get a little bonus. Obviously, there's a slight downside that if it's not a backup, you send it to your break zone, which can be good and bad depending on the decks. So like depending on like what sort of water build you play, if you happen to play a water build that uses Lena or something, or anything to recur stuff from the break zone onto the field, then like sending like forwards from your deck to your discard pile or your break zone is actually not too bad. You might potentially hit something that you might want to revive, or something that sets you up for some sort of combo later. So depending on the deck, obviously it can be better or worse. Obviously, if you're playing a deck that has a higher backup count, especially if you're playing one of those as I was saying a little bit earlier, one of those decks where you are destroying your backups with like Heroic Lulu and Forden and those sort of cards, then potentially your backup count will be higher, which gives you a slightly better chance of hitting stuff with Astral Urgent. So I think this is a very solid water backup, and I think it's actually very underrated. Next, we have Chime. It's a 4 CP backup. It's a FFCC, so it's a Crystal Chronicles card. Not that it really matters too much right now in the game. If you control a card named Leo, the cost required to play Chime onto the field is reduced by 2, so it effectively becomes a 2 CP backup. When Chime enters the field, choose 1 forward an opponent controls. You may return 1 forward you control to its owner's hand. If you do so, return the chosen forward to its owner's hand. So I think that this card has one too many restrictions on it. So like, first of all, like if you didn't have Leo as a 4 CP backup, this card's weak. Like you have to return one of your forwards in order to return one of your opponent's forwards, right? So like, yeah, so if it gave you the option of you may return a forward as well, but you always get to return one of your opponent's forwards, then I would say that this card's very playable, right? Even if you had Leo on field to reduce from a 4 to a 2, even then to just bounce your opponent's forward from the field to a hand, like without sacrificing one of your own forwards, I think that would have been fair, right? But the fact that you have to bounce one of your own forwards in order to bounce one of your opponent's forwards, considering that there are so many cheap ways to just bounce stuff now, and bouncing stuff isn't even like that good in the current metagame. So yeah, the fact that it's 4 CP base, that reduces down to a 2 if you control Leo. That's a kind of a restriction on this card. In that, like, if you don't have Leo, this card costs 4, right? And then yeah, you have to return one of your forwards in order to return one of your opponent's forwards. And if like with a card this specific or this niche, I would have expected it to be a EX burst. I expected it to be like EX burst. You can do this as well, right? So that's another like card. That's another thing that sort of holds us back. So I think, yeah, all things considered, this card is actually like quite underpowered for what it does. It's not a terrible card, but I think that it's just got too many loopholes that you have to jump through for an effect that isn't a strong enough payoff. And there's like really no cards in the game right now that sort of require or pay you off for having a lot of FFCC cards on the field. Leo just like pays you off for having like a ton of cards on the field. So there's no reason to specifically play Chime, even if you are playing Water and Earth and you're playing Leo in the deck. Like, it still doesn't seem like there's much of a reason to play Chime. And her ability's not even like that particularly fantastic when you do hit it off. Art looks great, but overall as a card, not particularly good. Next, we have Paladin. It's a 5 CP forward at 8,000 power. If Paladin is dealt damage by a forward, reduce the damage by 4,000 instead. So this includes both ability damage as well as combat damage. So in terms of that, he's actually pretty beefy. Like, yes, he was actually pretty beefy. But yeah, obviously, like, he's got no protection against like summons. Yeah, or summons that deal damage to him. At 5 CP, he's a little bit overcosted, considering he is 8,000 power forward, and he doesn't really have any sort of like strong proactive type abilities. Obviously, this does synergize very well with Water's Minwu, in that like obviously if he reduces damage by 4,000 first, and then if it's not lethal damage, then like the entire thing gets wiped from Minwu with Minwu's ability. That being said, though, I do think that like the light warrior of light, so the Opus 2 light warrior of light that was 4 CP 8k power, similar same power level, costs 1 CP less, but instead reduces damage dealt to him by both summons and abilities by 2,000. Seems to be a better play than Paladin. Yeah, it seems to be a better play than Paladin. Even if you consider the restriction that Warrior of Light is a light card, I would much rather use Warrior Light over Paladin in these sort of situations. Yeah, because just like Warrior Light costs less. Its stats, its ability is pretty much even, and it does have an interesting S ability as well, whereas Paladin doesn't. So because of that, I think if you had a choice, or if you're not playing some sort of pauper type deck, then yeah, definitely like Warrior Light does seem to be the better way to go for this sort of type body and ability. Next we have Piège. It's a 4 CP forward at 5,000 power, EX burst. When Piège enters the field, you may search for one job, prince, and add it to your hand. So I looked up the list of this, and there's like not many like great princes in the game. There's a lot of fantastic princesses, but yeah, not many good princes at all. So first of all, Piège can search for himself because he is a job prince, so you can search for Piège. You can search for Gordon, which is that Opus 1 card that really hasn't seen play for a long time. You can search for Scott, which is an FF2 card, which obviously like works with Gordon. And there's one more prince, but like, I forget what it was, and it's also pretty irrelevant as well. But pretty much in Final Fantasy, princesses are really good, princes suck. And yeah, Piège as like, even though it becomes like with Destin on the field, that does reduce its cost by 1. Like it goes from a 3 CP 5k to a 1 CP 5k that searches for princes. That being said, the princes suck, so why would you search for princes? Yeah, so this card like really is just kind of like a filler card. He doesn't do anything relevant. Even in the Knights deck, which is like a deck that you might consider playing Destin in, because Trion and Clady are both solid in that, you still probably wouldn't play Piège. So yeah, not a fantastic card. Doesn't search for anything relevant or useful. And yeah, so like wouldn't play him even in a Water Lightning deck, and you had Destin in the deck. Next we have Hilda. It's a 6 CP backup. When Hilda enters the field, draw 1 card for each forward you control. You can only draw up to 4 cards with this ability. So obviously people immediately thought, oh yeah, play with some sort of swarm deck. Obviously the new Laila comes to mind, because you can put a Laila and a Viking down. But obviously there's a lot of cards in Water that just allow you to play shit for free from your break. So whether it's Laila, whether it's Gao, whether it's Lena, and obviously all those things synergize with Hilda quite well. That being said though, I feel that Hilda is overcosted for her ability. So if you consider the fact that she is a 6 CP forward, like when you have 2 forwards on the field, you effectively get 4 CP back. So she becomes effectively a 2 CP backup if you have 2 forwards on the field, right? So which isn't too hard for Water to do per se, but like even at like okay, sort of like even at like having 2 forwards on the field, this backup is strictly just okay. It's strictly on par with all the other 2 CP backups, right? If you have a third forward, then all of a sudden this backup becomes effectively free. Like you get to put, this becomes a 2 CP backup, right? But you still had to discard 3 cards or spend 6 CP in order to put this card into play in order to draw 3 cards, right? And that's how, when you have 3 forwards. It only becomes like positive value when you have 4 forwards on the field. So when you have 4 forwards on the field, you're sacrificing 3 cards and you're using this card as a backup in order to draw 4 cards. So yeah, so only when you super overextend by having a lot of forwards on the field, then Hilda becomes good, right? So like you kind of come positive on Hilda. But like even in like, so from 0 to 1, it's from 0 to 1 forwards, this card's bad, right? You wouldn't play it, right? From 2 to 3 forwards, this card becomes acceptable, and only at 4 forwards, which is not easy to do, or like it sets you up for like some massive punishment, then this card becomes good, right? So that's kind of the issue with this card. It's like the scaling of you have to put in so much effort for a potential payoff, and the payoff isn't even like that great, right? I think if this backup costed 4 CP, I think that it would actually see play. It would have been like a pretty fair card at 4 CP. But at 6 CP, it's kind of too restrictive. And unfortunately, there are certain cards, there's only really one card, Scott, that does get a bonus from Hilda. So there's no real reason to play Hilda. Or I suppose there's not much reason to play Scott because Hilda's bad. And because Hilda's bad, you don't really want to play Scott. And so because of that, I don't think this card's particularly a card that you want to play. Now, obviously, it's like, oh yeah, just use it as an ability to cycle through your deck and whatnot, right? But a big issue that Water has is that it loses on deck out a lot, right? So if you're playing this cool strategy of, you're using Laila and Vikings and getting a whole bunch of guys for free and you're drawing cards and stuff, you still have a 50 card deck, right? So if you're not killing your opponent very quickly, it's very easy for your opponent to use a ball wiper 2, and that sets you back on a lot of aggressive power. And all of a sudden you're going to definitely lose on deck out. The clock on Water decks to finish the game is much shorter than pretty much any other deck or pretty much any other element in the game. So you really got to force through wins fast. And that's the biggest weakness of Hilda and Laila and this strategy or this archetype overall, is that great, you're building up a ton of resources. You're playing a whole bunch of guys for free. You're getting to draw a whole bunch of cards. You're good on resources. But the thing is, you have to kill your opponent now within like the next 6 turns or something, because your deck just burns its way through. And as soon as your opponent realizes that like their opponent only has like 8 cards or like 10 cards left in deck, all they have to do is just stall you out for like 5 turns and you just lose. And then you have to overextend super hard just to fight your opponent. So in that regard, I am, as cool as it is to play these cards that draw you a ton of cards, I'm now super wary of it, because like last year I played a lot of Water and a lot of Wind Water, and that was the biggest weakness. The biggest weakness of those decks is that you draw a lot of cards and your deck runs out really, really quickly. And I think that this is kind of the hidden weakness of this card that people might get overexcited about, but don't realize until like they're playing it more regularly at larger tournaments. Next, we have one of the Water legendaries of the set. We have Mingu. It's a 4-cost forward at 7,000 power. When Mingu enters the field, reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, add 1 summon among them to your hand, and return other cards to the bottom of your deck. So straight away, it becomes a 2 CP 7k forward, which is already above curve. But when Mingu attacks, you may cast a summon of cost 4 or less from your hand without paying the cost. So this card is all about like CP value. It gives you a lot of tempo value in the sense that straight away, like, assuming that you do grab a summon with it, 2 CP 7k is already above curve, right? But then your opponent has to get rid of him immediately, because every time he attacks, he gets you like effectively 4 CP for free, or like 3 CP depending on like which summons you play and whatnot, right? So obviously this is going to be a card that pushes itself more towards a summon heavy deck. So obviously you probably want to have like, I feel that like having around 12 to 15 summons is sort of where you want to be in order to hit this effect like more consistently. And so like you really want to stack up on a lot of summons, obviously, which cuts into like the amount of space you have for the rest of your deck and so on. But yeah, the big like one of the issues is that like also you can't play it in a mono Water deck as well, because mono Water like Water summons, they're not too many of them that are like good 4-cost Water summons, and not too many of them are good proactive plays. A lot of them are very reactive. They're like combat buffs or the bouncing type effects. The 2 elements I think that Minwu would do really strong well with is a Water Fire deck where you get to like play all those Bahamut's for free, whether it's a new Bahamut that deals you damage, or whether it was like Opus 4 Bahamut, the one that dealt 8,000 damage, or like playing it in Water Lightning where you get to use like Ramu's and Odin's, which are like pretty good value cards by themselves as well, and destroying forwards. Then yeah, so I think Minwu is much better in a dual color deck, where you can really make use of those like sort of mid-range summons that like have a lot of like good removal ability. I think definitely Minwu would like slot into that quite well. And he's FF2, which does mean that he does have some benefits of he can be played with cards like Guy for some sort of benefit as well. But yeah, so this card is actually very solid. The caveat is that you pretty much have to play him in a dual color deck. but yeah, like if you do, I think that this card is going to be a very solid card. Obviously, he does clash with the water backup Minwu. But yeah, so like definitely it's more reason not to play in a mono water deck. But yeah, if you're playing in a Drago card deck, I think that's exactly where Minwu belongs. Now, talking about the second legendary of water for the set, we have Yuna. It's a 6 CP, 8,000 power forward, so it's below the curve. But when Yuna enters the field, play 1 Job Gold Wings forward from your hand onto the field, or search for 1 Job Gold Wings forward other than card name Yuna and add it to your hand. So if you choose the second option of searching your deck for a Job Gold Wings, effectively she becomes a 4 CP AK. So that's alright. If you use her first ability to put in a Pain or a Riku into play, then she becomes significantly lower. So if you're putting the 4-cost Pain into play, then she effectively becomes a 2 CP 8k forward. And if you're putting a Riku in, she's a 3 CP 8k forward. So obviously you probably want to put Pain in with her most of the time just to get that extra bit of discount. And if you don't have a Pain or a Riku, then you can obviously just search for one. So this card is like, obviously if you're playing Gold Wings deck, this card's always going to have an ability attached to it, right? It's the second ability of pay 1, remove 3 summons in your background from the game, choose 1 Job Gold Wings forward you control, or like job 1, choose 1 Job Gold Wings forward, activate it against plus 1,000 power until the end of turn. So yeah, so this ability seems a little bit underwhelming for me, especially considering that this card is a legendary. Yeah, paying 1 CP and removing 3 summons from your breakdown to effectively get a Sylph type ability to reactivate and give plus 1 forward to one of your forwards seems kind of weak. And yeah, you have to obviously have summons in your break zone. I think potentially if it was 2 summons, it might have been like more fair. Or if it gave all your, like, reactivates all your Gold Wings and gave them all plus 1,000 power, then maybe I could potentially think that would be more balanced as well. But I think right now that ability is just a little bit underwhelming, that you're only reactivating like 1 Gold Wings. Like, it's not even like 1 like character forward, it's 1 Job Gold Wings forward, right? And only gives it plus 1,000 power. So I think it's pretty underwhelming. And yeah, and so like I really like the other 2 Gold Wings, but I think Yuna, she seems like the weakest Gold Wing out of all 3, and she happens to be in a separate color. To be honest, if you just like, you can just literally play the Wind Gold Wings in a like wind mono wind deck or a Wind X deck. Don't even bother with this unit, in my opinion. Like, yeah, I wouldn't even bother like playing like Water Unit in a Gold Wings deck. As crazy as that seems. Yeah, just because I think the payoff for this unit isn't particularly that good. Next we have Leviathan. It's a 3 CP summon, and yeah, they've made yet again another Leviathan, but this one's actually pretty interesting. So it doesn't have EX burst, unlike a lot of the Leviathans, but select 1 of the 3 following actions. Choose 1 forward, return to his owner's hand. Choose 1 action ability, cancel its effect. Or during this turn, the forwards you control don't receive any damage from summons. Now, this is actually pretty good. Now, obviously, you're losing the ability of EX Burst, which kind of sucks, but but you're getting like 2 additional options for it, and those 2 additional options are actually pretty solid. So yeah, the fact that like it's like similar to like basic Leviathan, it can like choose a forward and return to his owner's hand, so that's fine, right? Its second ability, choose 1 action ability, cancels effect. So that's any ability that uses the payment. So payment, like ellipses power. So like any dull type ability, those are action abilities. Or like any sort of payment abilities, those are action abilities, right? So you can cancel something, right? Do note that doesn't include special abilities. So if your opponent's using a special ability, you can't cancel with this, right? But yeah, so that actually opens up a lot of interesting things. So at the very least, if your opponent is playing something like Star Sibyl, your opponent uses Star Sibyl, breaks it, tries to play like a 5-cost or a 6-cost for free, bang, you do Leviathan, you can cancel its ability, right? So in that regard, it's actually like pretty solid, the second ability, especially if anytime where your opponent is putting in a big cost, canceling it is actually really, really strong. The third ability of during this turn, forwards you control don't receive any damage from summons, that's actually pretty powerful as well. Yeah, like especially like definitely depending on certain matchups, definitely more relevant against fire and lightning matchups, but potentially in earth matchups as well. So yeah, so the third ability of just like making all you guys like not receive damage from summons is actually pretty powerful. So yeah, this card is really, really flexible. While you don't get to choose more than 1 option, like the remove from this set, all 3 of these abilities are actually very strong. And 2 of them have really strong, like, good reactive abilities to it. So this is a very reactive card. But yeah, if if you can discount this down to 2 CP with like your rare unit, then it becomes even more powerful. So like I'm actually really keen to chuck one or two of these into my water decks and seeing what sort of very interesting things we can do with it. And I think that this is the final card of the set. It is Laila. She is a 4 CP forward at 3000 power. When Laila enters the field, choose one card named Viking. Of course, 3 or less from your break zone. Play it onto the field. So yeah, so obviously you want to choose the most value Viking, which is the Opus 4 free CP Viking. So this Viking, when it enters the field, draw a card. When it leaves the field, draws a card, right? So people have been doing the maths on this, and like there's been some debate in regards to like whether Laila is free or whether Laila is 2 CP or whether Laila is whatever, right? But disregarding like all that maths, or like disregarding like the different ways that you can look at the maths, right? You're spending 4 CP to put Laila into play, and then you're getting a free Viking out of it, and then this Viking draws your card immediately. So immediately you're getting 2 CP back on 2 CP that you put that you spend on Laila, and then when this Viking leaves play, you eventually get another 2 CP back. So the cost to play Laila effectively can become 0 when the Viking leaves play, right? But obviously you have to consider that you had to play Laila as a card, right? So so if you consider that every card can be discarded for 2 CP, Laila is kind of like in like normal terms, she's a 0 CP forward, but if you like use like the modern CP calculation, then she's kind of 2 CP. But yeah, so either way, she's effectively a card you can put into play for free. Yeah, and she creates a Viking body. So obviously this does combo well with any sort of strategy that where you having lots of forwards on the field, such as if you're playing like a Hilda type strategy, or if you want to go old school and play legendary Titus from Opus 1, or if you want to sacrifice them away using like the Earth legendary Kefka. These are all options that are very viable and available to you. So yeah, Laila actually is very good and like fits into that synergy and strategy very, very well. So yeah, so as I was talking about earlier, I am hesitant to play these sort of strategies because you do tend to burn through your deck very, very quickly. But yeah, I think this card's actually very, very good value. No one's debating her value. Obviously, you got to play her with Vikings, but there's plenty of ways to search these cards. Yeah, there's plenty of ways to search for Vikings. And yeah, putting them into a break zone is pretty easy as well. So yeah, this card is very, very solid. I like it. I would be wary of playing too many copies of her in water decks just because you might run out of cards. But yeah, it's a solid card if you play it. If your opponent doesn't stall you out, you're good. And that's it for this video. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Yeah, let me know what you guys think about the cards. Were there any cards that you think I was overly harsh on? Were there any combos that I might have missed? Were there any mistakes? Guaranteed there's some mistakes. I really should put more editing and like do more review on this, but yeah, yeah. So like, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm doing my best. Like, I don't have a lot of time to make videos these days, so I'm trying to pump out as much as I can for you guys. Yeah, I'll have only one more video of the Opus 6 set review, and that'll be the light and dark cards, and I'll get that out to you pretty soon after this. But yeah, then afterwards we can get cracking and like start doing some deck videos. But otherwise, yeah, if you guys have any questions, do let me know. If you enjoyed this video, please thumbs up and subscribe. And otherwise, I'll catch you guys later. GrandJ out.